Welcome to the Scottsdale Vibes podcast. I'm Alicia Haygood. We are so lucky to have the one and only hip historian with me today at the table, Mr. Marshall Shore. If you don't know him, you've probably seen him. And if you haven't seen him, you've probably heard him. Either way, we're going to put it all together today and introduce you to him. He was featured in our Scottsdale City Lifestyle Love issue in February, is how I first read about him and learned about him. And I've been dying to connect with him in person. And let me tell you, he is even more magical in person than he is on what you're going to see in here today. So don't forget to go check out this episode on YouTube to see him and his unique style and voice and his amazingly talented knowledge and thrust and love of history for all things, not just Arizona. So I'm going to take a short break. Don't forget to subscribe to this episode and the podcast on ScottsdaleVibes.media or anywhere else you listen to your podcast. We're also on Instagram, social media, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. We'll be right back after this short break. When it comes to protecting you, your family, and all your assets, you need to have someone that you can trust. And that's Jeremy Mueller of State Farm Insurance. Jeremy Mueller has lived in Scottsdale his whole life. How can anyone else know your needs more than someone who's been here and seen it all? Jeremy and his team are always ranked in the top % at State Farm. He cares, he's knowledgeable, and most importantly, he's always available. Don't believe me? Give him a call at 480-515-5223 or find him at jeremymueller.com. All right. Not everyone can make history hip, but Marshall Shore sure can. His passion is uncovering the weird, the wonderful, and the obscure treasures from our past, the semi-forgotten people, places, and events that have made us who we are today. Developed in an almost cult-like following for his sharing of history through virtual and personal events. The one and only Marshall Shore started off as a librarian, which I think is like a perfect fit for someone who loves to learn in history, but he has taken that love to the next level by sharing it all with us. So, Marshall, I love that you're actually a librarian for decades. Started in New York, became a librarian here in Phoenix. A perfect place, like I said. But I assume you didn't just love to become a historian at the library. So really, where did your love and passion for history start?
So I moved to Arizona 24 years ago because in New York, I was getting tired of getting pushed from neighborhood to neighborhood. So it was like, okay, either buy something or go for adventure.
Yeah.
And
always choose adventure.
Well, exactly. It's like, didn't have a place at that point. So it's like, hey, Phoenix, I've never been there. Let's go. So actually, my parents retired up north in the middle of nowhere in a little tiny town called Yucca.
Oh, yeah. I've actually heard of it, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's like, I came here because of that.
Okay.
And so got here, and I started working in this little library in South Phoenix, where I started learning about the community through these oral stories.
Okay.
And then it's like, okay, what about that community? And nobody had anything. So I was like, well, let me go talk to some folks over there. Mm-hmm. And so I just started talking to more people and kind of getting this base knowledge of just Phoenix through stories, and still doing that today and just sharing those stories. And so now the fun is creating these little arcs. I mean, last night for Earth Day, we talked about Arizona tree history. Who knew there was such a thing? But oh my gosh, it was like, we were just talking, it's like, this could actually be a book. So many cool stories about trees.
I guess you're right. Like, everything has a history. We have a history. I mean, this place we're in, everything has a history.
Right. And so that was the fun thing of just trying to find those stories, share those stories, and really kind of curate that whole experience.
That's hilarious. I love that. So what did you learn about trees?
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's like, I learned that you can nominate things for heritage trees. So like here in Scottsdale, there are the Winfield Scott olive trees that he planted, that the city has designated historic, and so there's the story of those. It's
right across from the Olive restaurant, isn't it? Yeah. I learned about that on a tour.
Yeah, and so I thought that was really cool that you can now nominate things, and then it's like, when you talk about trees, I learned about the Black migration to Arizona of lumber. From a town in Louisiana, they moved to this little town called McNairy here that was renamed because of the lumber company. And when it basically shut down, all those families moved north. And so a lot of them are still hanging around in Arizona.
I love that. See, you just never know.
You never know where you never know where the next story's coming from.
You mentioned a keyword, storytelling. It's really, whether you read a story, you write a story, or you're talking about the story, it's how history is made is by this story.
Right.
The art of storytelling is an art in and of itself. How did you learn to become a storyteller?
Well, when I was in libraries, I was a children's librarian. So I did lots of story time, lots of storytelling. And so it was really just a natural kind of takeoff of that. I mean, it started off a friend. I said, hey, I got this idea. I just want to drive down Grand Avenue and talk about the things that I discovered.
Okay.
And so she's like, we've got a furniture store full of all these retro couches. Why don't we just put them on in a line, and we got a wall you can project on that. So that's what we did. And that was like 2009.
Wow.
And so that was the first thing. And so it was like talking about Arizona as I was discovering it, and really kind of how I fell in love with Arizona. That's what I share, is all these cool stories, and then it leads to the next story, and the next story. It's like we did an event a couple months ago that was Cat Fest out in Mesa. And my friend said, do you want to do a presentation on Arizona cat history? I'm like, sure, I don't know what there is, but there's got to be something. And
there is, of course.
And of course, now I'm looking forward to next year when we can add even more to that.
Did you ever think you knew that much about cats?
No. And that's the fun thing.
I
remember one of the first events I did was actually for Scottsdale Public Art. It was one of the early Canal Convergence.
Oh, wow.
And they wanted me to do bicycle history of Arizona.
Okay.
And so right off the bat, we started talking about Lucius Copeland and his 1880 steam-powered bicycle.
Oh my goodness!
But then I found,
that would hurt, you would think.
Well, yeah, it was before gasoline, so that's why there was steam, and it would get you going a whole 12 mile an hour.
That's fast back then.
It was, and so but then I found there was this Merci train. So during the war, the U.S. sent all these train cars to France, and as a thank you after the war, they sent every state a train car. In our train car, there was this 1940s Peugeot bicycle.
Okay.
And it was at the Capitol Museum in downtown Phoenix. And so I called and said, can I borrow it?
I bet they've never had that request before.
They said, no one's ever asked. We don't know. And it took them a while. They finally said, yes, you can, but you have to wear gloves. You can never touch the bicycle.
Yeah. Makes sense.
That's fine. I think they thought that would be a detractor.
All right.
But if you see somebody walking down the Scottsdale Canal holding a bicycle that's obviously not going to roll, carrying it with white gloves,
you know it's a big deal.
You know there's something going on. And so that was part of the fun of it, was just the spectacle of carrying this white gloved bicycle.
You obviously have a love for learning. Have you always been like that from childhood to adulthood?
I mean, I remember going to the library as a kid. My first apartment out of my parents' house was across the street from the library I was going to. And so I'm always curious about what's next. And, growing up in a small town, everything was storytelling.
Yeah.
When you get somebody on the highway stop for Astor directions, you would send them up to the DeFries farm.
Yeah.
The DeFries hadn't never lived there since I had been there. But you called it no matter what the family's name was. And so you went up there, the flashing light, you turned that. And so everything was all about the story.
I love that.
And so that's what I get to do now, is just tell stories about Disney in Arizona, signs across Arizona, kind of that signage history.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
I mean, it really is everywhere you go and everything there is. Yeah. It's why it's so important to look up and see and talk to people, because that's what you're going to learn. Well, let's talk. You have the title, The Hip Historian. Tell me how the title came about, besides just your hip style, because I want to incorporate that answer into it as well.
So every year, February 14th, we have Statehood Day.
Mm-hmm.
And back in 2012, we had our centennial for 100 years of Arizona.
Amazing, crazy.
And so they had an event at the Capitol, and there was Marshall Trimble talking. And there was also this other person, Marshall Shore, talking. And people would confuse the two of us because they have the same first name.
Yep.
So the head of tourism was trying to figure out how to describe me to someone who didn't know who I was, and said, oh, he's the hip historian. And I threw her a note back and said, Karen, thank you so much.
I love Karen.
That is now my moniker. And
thank you, Karen.
Exactly.
I know. How crazy is that?
Yeah.
Because you always have been. You've always had a unique style. We kind of talked about this a little bit. You always have been hip, and hip is something that's unique and special and stands out for what that person is and who they want to be. Talk about your style, because that's really the first thing people see And then you dive into really how hip you are about being a historian.
And, so basically, as a kid, I started dressing based on emotion.
Love it.
And it's like, the sweater vest that I was wearing, I got with my grandparents. The shirt was a Christmas present. And, the plaid pants just make me happy. So my mom would be like, "You're going out like that?" I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "Okay."
Yeah. Encourage
it. She still says, "What are you wearing? And why?"
Because she wants to know the story behind it.
And usually there is a story behind whatever I'm wearing. A lot of times, I have a lot of Keith Haring wear. Because Keith Haring, who was a graffiti artist out of New York, came here in the late 80s, actually mid-80s, and did a huge mural that I think really heavily influenced the art that we're seeing now with all these murals.
Yeah.
So it's like, so I wear something so that way I can talk about Keith Haring.
See, there's always a purpose to it.
Yes.
It may look unput together, but there is a purpose and a reason.
I overthink everything.
Which is great for a historian, actually, because you get to consume more knowledge. Let's talk about Arizona. I am from the South. I knew Arizona was hot. I knew it was a desert. And I knew that my grandparents used to come visit their cousins every year out here in Phoenix. Outside of that, I had no idea what it was. When I moved here 5 years ago, I immediately fell in love with it. It is a hidden gem, I feel like, to people that have not visited here. And I tell everyone that. And when they come here, you feel it and you see it too. Right. So as far as like the history of Arizona and State 48, because we were late to the game when it came to joining, the union and stuff. What are some of your favorite history about Scottsdale in Arizona?
So
I don't even know if you can answer that. So give me.
I can.
Okay.
And so I'm going to say Rusty Warren.
Okay.
It was a name that most people probably don't know.
Tell me.
But we've all benefited from her. So she was a classically trained pianist from the East Coast, and she wanted to get a job playing the piano.
Okay.
And so she got a job at a little bar in Central Phoenix playing the piano. She winds up having 15 albums.
Oh my gosh.
Half of those have gone gold. And her humor was she was very pro-female in her humor.
Okay.
And so her hit song in the early 60s was called Knockers Up. And so she is now billed by the Library of Congress as the birth mother of the sex revolution for that song.
Really?
She went across the U.S. into small towns all over the place playing that song. Wives would show up to listen to her. Their husbands tagged along to drink. And everybody made money. Everybody was happy. And so she actually wound up with quite a bit of real estate here in Scottsdale.
Interesting.
The last time she was on stage was here at a comedy club.
When was that?
She would have been in her late 80s, so probably like 2015, 16.
Wow, so still.
And she was like, I used to own this land that this club was on. And so
you talk about seeing the change in history really grow. I mean, you've been here for, you said 29 years?
I've been here 24 years.
Okay. The history that you've seen develop over time by living here and stuff like that, what are some of the things that you're excited about and, to be a part of Scottsdale's history?
I think a lot of times it's just making sure that the story is told. Mm-hmm. That a lot of times it's just too easy to be like, oh, that's a cool building and leave it at that. Mm-hmm. The fact that with Scottsdale, you've got the mission right down.
I know, that's really cool.
And I love the fact that they're bringing the Festival of Roses they did earlier this year. And so they're bringing that tradition back. And I love those things that just kind of play into that tradition. Looking at canal convergence. Yeah. And the fact that, A, it's on the canal. A, it's at the Palo Solari Bridge. So, just the fact that it's happening right there, there's all this history that you might not know. Those canals are why we're named Phoenix. Why we're all here is because of those canals.
You forget when you live here, we forget to be tourists in our own city, right? I've met people that are born and raised here, but have never been to the Grand Canyon. I've been here 5 years and been 3 times, right? Like, you have to...
Did you take the train?
I didn't yet. Okay.
Yeah, that's the best
way.
It
is the best way.
Oh, completely.
Okay.
Because, you get to spend the night in Williams.
Yes, I know.
So when I was there, I stayed in an old train car.
Yeah.
And then hopped on the train, went north, and on the way north, it started snowing.
See?
And
so beautiful.
It actually snowed so much that the park pretty much shut down, which was kind of fun. I mean, our tour were canceled, everything, but it was just kind of fun to be tromping around. And you always see the Grand Canyon in summer.
Yeah.
It's all spectacular. But to see it all covered in snow was
beautiful.
a completely different beauty.
I love that. I've hiked it once. I've took my family up there. My husband, that's like his happy place, he calls it. He's done rim to rim to rim a couple times. And it's one of those things that goes back, like you were saying, we walk down Old Town or we walk anywhere and it's like, oh, that's a pretty building, and we keep going. It's, you love where you live, learn about it, understand why, and appreciate it, because you'll learn to love your city in a whole new light when you actually understand where you live.
I mean, also, one of my favorite things about Scottsdale is the fashion history.
Tell me.
Scottsdale. Oh my gosh. Okay, so have you been to F&B?
No.
Okay, so first off, amazing restaurant.
Okay.
His chef Charlene is amazing.
Okay. On my list. It's Arizona Restaurant Week coming up too. So
yes. I mean, that's
okay.
I don't know if Pablo has it on.
It doesn't matter, but I can. Sometimes it's better to go to those that are not on the list. And
amazing food, but the space they're in is Lloyd Kiva New's first showroom.
Really?
So he was an indigenous kind of fashion designer that brought together various indigenous communities. So Charles Aloma did his silver. So he was working with all these community folks. And that was where he had his retail space.
Wow.
And so he was making leather handbags. And so if you find one, he would also write inside the handbag who it was for. So I've seen like Mrs. Maytag's handbag.
Really?
Yeah.
Is it pretty?
It was
very that era.
It was very the era. It was just a simple black handbag, but you flipped it open and it's just like Mrs. Maytag. So I love the fact that you can talk about the Maytag family being in Arizona.
It's huge. Who doesn't know Maytag? Yeah.
And right. I mean, everyone knows the name, but you don't realize there was actually a family named Maytag.
Nice.
And so then you also have like Robert Black, who has Fashion by Robert Black, amazing store. And so the building he's in was the White Hogan, which is where they did a lot of production playing with Lloyd Kiva and some of those other folks. And he has an amazing collection in the back of clothing shops from Fifth Avenue. I mean, you've got the Kiva Center, which is where Lloyd Kiva's shop was with F&B, that was recently redone by Doug Sidnor. They went through and did an amazing job of taking it painstakingly back to the original colors.
Wow.
So
hard to do.
Yeah. I mean, it's beautiful, and I love that it's like you can sit there and have dinner in this really historic place that really is what he was the first retail arts in Scottsdale.
It goes on and on forever. What history can be boring, some people may seem. Where do you help people understand, like, history is important, it creates everything we do, it takes us from here to there. What do you think is the most valuable thing about history?
I always like to try to figure out, well, why should I care now? And so
Great
that's
question.
What I think is like with F&B, it's like, you can have this world-class meal and the history of the building. So it's not just this amazing food, but then there's the story of that. The fact that the bread you're having in F&B actually comes from Barrio Bread in Tucson.
It's a history to everything.
He comes up and bakes bread once a week. And he is a James Beard Award-winning bread maker now.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, I mean, Pavle, lays it all out on the table and says, okay, here's what we've got. And so, yeah, it's such an experience.
I think everything about life is an experience in that sense, and you start to appreciate it. Having 2 children and them in school right now, I'm learning so much about them. My son loves history. In fact, it was his teacher that kind of got me to realize his love and passion for history. And he'll be so funny because he'll be like, well, I didn't think that you'd wanted to know about that because you're not a history fan. I was like, actually, I feel like as an adult, I appreciate history more now than I ever did as a child. Number one, it affects me, but I have the patience and desire to learn more now, I think, than it was like being forced down my throat as a child. Well,
and I think also for me, it was having those professors in college that history was alive for them.
I love that.
I mean, like I had one professor who was talking about the Constitution and would get all excited about the fact that we were going to talk about this tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so I talk about things that I'm passionate about.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing. So, we can talk about Paolo Solari. We can talk about Cosante, Arco Santi, and places you can go visit today that have this really cool history about how they got there.
Yeah. I love that. What do you think is probably one of the most hidden treasures of Scottsdale because it really is one of the biggest towns that started off in Scottsdale. Main Street was all we had, when it first started. And now look at it, it's massive and grown. I tell everyone it's a small town with a big city vibe almost.
One of my favorite places to go that might not be a hidden gem, but I don't think enough people go, is the Museum of the West.
I love that. We were just talking about that before you got in here, too.
I mean, it's such a great place because you think it's going to be full of all these Remington statues.
Right.
And it's not.
It's not.
It really, and they have rotating exhibits all the time. And so they bring together a passion for the Southwest filtered through there. I love the fact that it's a private museum that's now, they've done such a good job that the Smithsonian, they are now an affiliate of the Smithsonian.
Isn't that amazing? Because it almost didn't happen.
Right.
They had to work hard to get that museum here.
And the collections, the fact that, the movie post, every time I go there, there's all these different exhibits going on. They've got some mainstays, but you walk in and there is this big silver saddle.
Yeah.
And so that actually came from the state fairgrounds.
Oh.
It's like no one knew it was there until suddenly somebody opened a chest and found this. And so it had not been cared for decades.
Yeah.
And was in bad shape. And so it's not really usable. But as a museum piece to look at, it's this beautiful parade silversmithing that would have been used for just those JC parades.
Wow. What do you think is a piece of history that you own that's so valuable and special to you?
I have a Lloyd Kiva men's shirt.
Okay.
That I don't wear. It's getting threadbare in spots. It was like that when I got it, but I just love the fact that it's this connection. And that when you talk about Lloyd Kiva New, you can look at a place where cattle track out in Scottsdale, the old artist community, is still thriving today. And the fact that he didn't live there, but he had friends there. And so he would go visit. Yeah. And so I just love that it was like, there was this huge artist scene here.
Still is, yeah.
And still, the artists are still here.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one of the things I love is the fact that right on those canals, you can walk along the canals and we get that almost, it's like, we're not Venice. We are not San Antonio. No. But
I'm glad too.
Exactly. What I love is that it's like Arizona is like no other place.
Yeah.
It's like we look to see what other places are doing, but we don't copy it. We kind of put it through our own spin cycle.
So true.
And then it's like it comes with something completely different that's so Arizona.
I love that because it is. We are unique. That's what I said at the beginning. Like we are a hidden gem and how we are and what we like. And yes, there is a style to us, but it is Arizona style, right. Very much so. All right, Marshall, my favorite question to ask everyone. What is your favorite Scottsdale vibe? And can't be yourself because you are a whole Marshall vibe in of yourself.
I would say I love the vibe of Canal Convergence.
I love it.
I love the fact that you have this celebration of the arts. Every year it's different. Mm-hmm. And that it's free. Mm-hmm. Anybody is welcome to show up, participate. Whether it's listening to a band that you may never have heard or engaging with a work of art. And it's not just adults, it's families.
All the time.
I've seen people, it's basically strollers to oxygen tanks.
Yeah.
And everywhere in between.
You're right. We love coming down for Canal Convergence. And I love it too because every year it's different. It brings artists in from around the world to showcase Scottsdale, this tiny little area. It's remarkable what gets done for that week of art. Yeah.
And it's so much fun. You have Walter Studios typically do something actually in the canal. Mm-hmm. My first connection to the canal actually was here in Scottsdale. Scottsdale Public Art did an event called Picnic with a Fish.
Tell me.
They were getting ready to repair a section of the canal. And so they had to clear the fish out. And then they got this idea of why don't we celebrate these fish? And
How funny.
So they basically bring in these white amber fish to eat the algae. that's in there. And because they would be considered an invasive species, they're actually sterilized before they even get put in the water, so they can't reproduce and take over everything. And so here we are getting ready for this big picnic in the middle of summer, and the artist that had done everything, Mary Lucking, did t-shirts for everybody, and they were going down the line, and they were like, got to me about the size of t-shirt, and they said, we've never seen you in a t-shirt. And I'm like, that's because I don't wear t-shirts in public. And they were, well, what do you want? I'm like, I want a suit coat.
Yeah.
And like, it's going to be hot. I'm like, it's going to be cotton.
There you go.
And so I got this great suit coat with these very much Dr. Seuss fish on the front and on the back.
Perfect.
That Mary created just for me. And once they saw it, they were like, oh, that's really cool. And you're going to wear that at other places, aren't you? I'm like, of course I am.
Of course you are. There's a whole story behind it.
So, I mean, not just how I got the jacket, but now anytime there's a water-themed event, I've got the perfect suit coat for it.
See, that's fantastic. Speaking of style and fashion and stuff like that, I was just hearing there's a professor at ASU, and for Earth Week, she got a bunch of old materials, and you've heard of like recycled fashion and stuff like that, but she also painted all of the pieces that she made too. So it's like recycled art, recycled fashion, and then she painted on it, and it's gorgeous. And she was like, it's just to represent like growing from the earth up, into what we wear today. And so I just love how all that's incorporated into everything that we do around here. Well, what's next for you, the hip historian, Mr. Marshall?
Coming up with summer, I'm going to be making stops in libraries kind of across the county.
How fun.
I've got one trip coming up to Bisbee.
Love that. We spent spring break there.
I love Bisbee.
Fantastic.
And so I'm going to be hitting libraries across the county, talking about a variety of things from Disney history, sign history, LGBTQ history.
I love it.
Arizona, because people think that we don't have so much history. And I'm like, oh my gosh, with just the signs. I mean, I can go on and on about the neon that's being preserved and how that's such a moment in time, neon. When the car came, that's when Arizona was booming.
Yeah.
So there was tons of neon.
Route 66, always.
Exactly.
Yeah. My mother-in-law, for her 66th birthday a few years ago, her and her boyfriend dressed in 66 garb and took Route 66 down from Colorado and drove the whole way here on it and stayed like in an old 66 motel near Williams and stuff like that. Like they made a whole trip for their 66th birthday out of it. And I loved it.
Yeah. I mean, I know in October I'm going to be up in Kingman. They are doing a Route 66 festival.
So fun.
Part of that So Route 66 celebrates 100 years in 2026.
Oh.
And so there's all kinds of things getting ready.
All right, we need to be ready.
So Kingman is hosting these events so that way when it happens. And, and Kingman is so cool. They have the Route 66 Electric Car Museum. That's huge.
Huh.
And so it's really cool to see the history of electric cars because you think, oh, they're new.
No, they're not.
No, they're not new at all.
And then anyone that knows Tesla knows it was named after a scientist who has been deceased for a very long time. Well, Marshall, I could sit here all day and continue to learn from you. Thank you for your passion because you really do make learning fun again. And it's not just for kids where you started storytelling in the libraries. It's for adults too. And thank you for bringing life to us again and for making us just look up and see what's around us because we have so much to learn still from who's sitting next to you to, like you said, the sign and everything else. So,
indeed.
All right, you can find him at The Hip Historian. We have the description of his link and everything in social media in the description of this episode. And also, you can find him out and about in town. Don't worry.
Indeed.
And if he's not standing out, it's really not Marshall. Go find someone else. All right, stay tuned. We'll be right back with the calendar of events. Buying a home can be scary and sometimes frustrating, but all of that can go away with the right realtor. And that's where Sean Shackleton with the Shackleton Group is here for you. Sean has over 25 years experience in real estate. She's here to get you what you want and won't settle for less. She's experienced, knowledgeable, and understands this market, which these days is always changing. Take the stress out of your next home purchase by calling Sean at 480-734-7277. You can also find her at theshackletongroup.com. Well, I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about history, the passion behind it, because we have so much to learn. So just look up and go read that plaque on the building or the tree or anything like that. We have so much to learn. I love it. I think it's so interesting. And really, to me, just helps make Scottsdale more enjoyable. Well, as we mentioned, Arizona Restaurant Week is happening. So since Scottsdale is known for our delicious food, the perfect week to get out and try something new that you may have been wanting to. Restaurants all over the valley are having specials this week. So bon appetit. You can click on the link in the description to see which restaurants are offering which kind of specials and meals. For all you fur babies out there, there is a free dog show happening at WestWorld on Saturday, May 18th from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Everything will be indoors, so don't worry about the heat. There'll be talent shows, vendors, and more, and maybe your pup can meet a new friend or two, so go enjoy that. And don't forget to support our local farmers out here as the Old Town Farmers Market is still happening Saturday from 8 to 12 p.m. Get some delicious homegrown food and more to fill your food frenzy. Well, have a wonderful week, Scottsdale. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on all your podcast listening apps. You can find this episode so you can see the Hip Historian on our YouTube channel and more. I'm all over Scottsdale, but I'm all over social media on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Have a wonderful week, Scottsdale. Keep vibing, and I'll see you around town.